Welcome, I'm Phil Cornish and I'm your host for Cornish Talks Common Sense. We've been doing some new programs that I hope will be of interest to you, talking about difficult subjects that have become controversial, that in the past might have seemed very mundane, but it shows you the degree that our society and civilization is transitioning and changing from its roots and foundation of Judeo-Christian values, which in time past would have been accepted as completely uncontroversial as the foundation of our world and our civilization. But today it is under attack as never before. And I sensed that happening as long ago as 25 years ago. More than that, when I started doing research on what eventually became a book. And I've referenced it a little bit in the programming so far, but we haven't focused right on that. And I'd like to spend some time doing that today. So come back in a minute and we're going to talk about my book called Now Through a Glass Darkly, Recounting the Human Captivity. And I think it will have some subject matter that will be of great interest to you, because I have predicted a lot of the things that are happening in our society today more than 25 years ago. Welcome back. So today I want to talk to you about my book, Now Through a Glass Darkly. I will say unabashedly, it is a book that comes to you from the Judeo-Christian perspective, a book that historically has very well-founded adherents in the political realm, in the scientific realm, and just generally in the civilization as it exists today. People who started with basic Judeo-Christian principles, people like Newton and Maxwell and Faraday, and politicians like Wilberforce and Pitt and others in England and in North America as well, who have followed the promotion of our society through implementing Christian values. But that has changed and it is now under attack. And why is this? Well, you know, the Bible predicts it. The Bible predicts that Christian faith will come under attack. And so this should not be a surprise. And I've told you about how that's unfolded in the recent past with philosophers such as Friedrich Nietzsche and Jacques Derrida and Michel Foucault, and others that I could go on, a long list of people who have now sought to tear down values of our society and civilization that are founded on its historic roots based in Christian, Judeo-Christian faith. So this has unfolded more than ever before in recent decades. And it's leaving our society on the abyss. And you might remember in one of our past programs, I talked to you about our society becoming unglued. I call it the great unraveling, because that is the direction our society is heading. And I'll talk to you about my ideas that reflect that in my book in just a moment. But I want to just take a moment to reference that article from a magazine called The American Scholar that talked about The Glue is Gone by an author named Edward Hoagland, that talked about the things that are holding our society together is being lost. He described it as if we are careening as a nation on tires as if they've lost their tread, bald tires that have lost all traction, and our society is heading for the ditch. He talks about that most of us have enough common sense to know there is some kind of God. Now, some people have a different notion of God that isn't exactly scriptural and biblical, which I would hold to, but just even more generally, the idea that there is a God used to be at least common. But now, as I've said, it is under attack, the idea that God is dead, the Nietzschean idea that you know, we're on our own, or the John Paul Sartre, you know, humanity's on its own. We can discard the idea of God and godly values. Michel Foucault following the same philosophy in a very degraded way. These are the force that has created the impetus to Christianity being under attack as never before in Canada and the United States today. And this was something that was on my mind more than 25 years ago when I wrote about it in my book, Now Through a Glass Darkly. And I want to just take you through some of those ideas to show you how that has unfolded. I talked a lot about our society unraveling with crime and drugs and alcohol, and we can easily see today how all of those features, crime and drugs and alcohol, are out of control. If you watch the media today, you'll see in San Francisco and New York, crime happening every day, people being pushed onto the subway and killed, people being attacked in robberies, people you know, just suffering horrible abuses. And that is something I talked about 25 years ago. And why did it level off for a while? Well, because people were imprisoned, and there was over 1 million people in American jails, and that's the only reason that the crime leveled off. But the reality is that crime, and fed often by alcohol and drugs, is, as we know today, a huge unfolding problem, something I talked about more than 25 years ago. And then there's the decline of the family, something I also talked about over 25 years ago. And we see the attack on the family today as never before. And if you watch the media, and I will say to you, Fox Media, thankfully, takes this on. We see in stories unfolding every day how parents are having to rise up in Virginia to take on school boards that are supporting transgenderism and the sexualization of kids as young as 5, 6, and 7 years of age. And taking over school curricula with ideas that historically would have been viewed as depraved and just unconscionable. And we see this all over educational institutions. In just some of our programming we've just done, I've talked to you about some of those stories. With the net effect that our society, as a normal society, is unraveling. And I've just mentioned in one of our programs about the passage of the Respect for Marriage Act in the United States, which is normalizing same-sex marriage. And so the historical, traditional family is under attack by never before. And I wrote about that 25 years ago. I also talked about how that is being fed by the immorality of our Hollywood culture, of music, of movies, of all the ways that our, especially younger generation, are influenced by these cultural phenomena. And clearly that is what's shaping children's thinking. I have a article I cut out of the statistics of the growth of transgenderism and of same-sex identity. And it's increased significantly in recent years. Well, why? Well, clearly not because of people being born that way, because that would make no sense, right? So initially, as the homosexual indoctrination agenda sought to do through people like Simon LeVay and Dean Hamer and others who wrote falsely, trying to promote that these people are born that way at birth. Well, now they've backed away from that because that can't coincide with the idea of gender fluidity and the idea that we're assigned a gender at birth, because that means that in fact you're not born as a homosexual. So these ideas are completely in discord. These ideas are completely irreconcilable. But these are the false agendas and the false narratives that are being taught, and particularly through our younger generation today, but infiltrating throughout society following the sexual revolution and the change in social and sexual mores and the development of changes in sexuality, in many respects, in infidelity that's causing breakdowns in in the family, as I've just spoken to, and in same-sex relationships, and in transgenderism. All of these are unfolding as social contagion that is infiltrating society in the same way that media and Hollywood and movies and music and so on infiltrate our thinking and shape our thinking. And so this is a topic I talked about 25 years ago, and we see happening today. I talked about the decline of religion because you know what? People are not embedded with religious ideas anymore. I talked about statistics to talk about people claim a nominal Christianity, but yet they don't even know the Bible. They don't know Bible verses, they don't attend church, they don't practice any particular doctrine. So it's a Christianity that has come to mean next to nothing because people have abandoned their scriptural and biblical views. And so instead we've succumbed to heresies and succumbed to false views. And so in my book 25 years ago, I talked about the manipulation of language like I've just talked to you in a program we've just done, talking about sexual immorality as being called just having an affair, and homosexuality just being an alternative lifestyle, and pro-abortion as simply being pro-choice, and euthanasia as dying with dignity. Right now in Canada, the MAID legislation and the expansive growth of people killing themselves by assisted suicide, something I talked about 25 years ago, is unfolding right now in Canada as a major issue of controversy. And I can go on and talk about many other items. Here's one that was really of interest to me that I want to take a moment to speak to you about, and that's the idea of the distortion of what reality is. Something in my book that I call Deception by Appearance, because you need to understand that what is unfolding in our society today is delusion. It is deception. The Bible predicts it. The Bible says that delusion will happen. And maybe I'll just take 1 minute to take you to a passage that even talks about that. It talks in, for example, 2 Timothy chapter 3, that there will be teachers who will come along that will propose counterfeit faith, who will tell people lies, and people will believe this. People will succumb to will succumb to falsehoods and abandon the historic Christian faith that has existed. And we hear the same thing in Romans 1, where it talks about people changing to sexual perversions, and in fact the growth of wickedness and sin and greed and hate and envy and murder and quarreling and deception and malicious behavior and gossip. And all these things are foretold in the Bible, things that are happening right now in our society today. And so these are things that we should pay attention to. And there's one more passage in 2 Thessalonians that, again, raises the same concerns about delusion that will happen. That I'll just read a passage that says that he, talking about satanic forces, will use every kind of evil deception to fool those on their way to destruction, because they refuse to love and accept the truth that would save them. So God will cause them to be greatly deceived, and they will believe these lies. They will be condemned for enjoying evil rather than believing the truth. So are you seeing how this all fits together? The postmodern ideas that says there is no more truth. There isn't, because people are being deceived into falsehoods that were predicted thousands of years ago that the Bible says will happen. And it's happening now in our society. And people are losing touch with reality. And I wanted to mention this because I talked about this in my book 25 years ago, about how people are losing the ability to distinguish reality from fantasy and from falsehood. And this is a scary proposition that is happening. And I wrote, quoting from an author who I really enjoyed, John Leo, now deceased, but who wrote for U.S. News and World Report, who as far back as 1991, just at the time I was writing, who says that infotainment is the phenomenon where truth takes a back seat and reality is treated as a rough first draft for docudramas that are just made up fictions, where customizing leads to problems of fantasy versus reality, where computer-altered photos and lip syncing are blurring the edges of reality for a new generation and turning the level of fantasy way up. And so, guess what we have happening? The idea of virtual reality. I brought that book along with me today too. One of those by this author is Howard Rheingold, talking about the revolutionary technology of computer-generated artificial worlds and how it promises to transfer society. And it is, because we see just in the news this year that Meta and Facebook and Zuckerberg are unleashing billions of dollars on what he's now calling the metaverse. And you see this in the newspapers every day now. The metaverse is a virtual reality, a fantasy world that is taking over reality and making it impossible to even distinguish fantasy from reality. I have another article with me today, I won't pull that out, by David Chalmers, a philosopher, famous philosopher, who is talking about that, showing how that, fantasy is now really no different than reality. We can't even tell the difference. Fantasy and reality, what's the difference? They're the same thing. Scary propositions that philosophers as famous as David Chalmers and others are preaching now. We're saying that fantasy and reality are becoming virtually indistinguishable. And I go on at length to talk about this in my book, where I talk about the effort in computerization and artificial reality and virtual reality to take on human personas. And we see this in our world today. I think there's a program called The Sims and one called Second Life, where people are literally living in artificial worlds and spending hours of time in artificial worlds and subsuming themselves in identities that are completely fake and artificial. This is happening today in our world and is taking over as billion-dollar industry promoted by Meta and their new metaverse. You need to pay attention to what is happening. I talked about this 25 years ago, and it is unfolding as a mammoth, monolithic effort in our world today that confuses reality from fantasy and confuses truth from falsehood. All these ideas that I've been speaking to you about in our programming are unfolding in our world today, and it was spoken of not just by me, but 2,000 years ago in the Bible talks about this phenomena that would unfold. And that's why our world, secular world, seeks to discount God, seeks to promote postmodernism, and seeks to promote the elevation of feelings. So pay attention to these things that are happening, because it is going to be an overwhelming influence in our world, and it is not something that is going to lead us in a good place. I will be back, hopefully, to talk about this and other programs in the future. Thank you for listening today.